Shadow Sites 1 and Shadow Sites 2 are sister films, which are shown ideally together in an exhibition space. And they both consist of aerial views over what looks like a desert landscape. Shadow Sites 1 is shot on 60mm film, so it has a very beautiful, soft, grainy texture. And it's shot from an aeroplane that's moving very slowly over the landscape. And it's taking a vertical perspective of the landscape, so when we're watching the film in exhibition, it looks as if the landscape is falling like a waterfall down the screen or the wall of the gallery. Shadow Sites 2, on the other hand, is made up of very high resolution digital stills, so it's made out of photographic images. And that's edited so that we zoom in very gently onto the sites that are depicted in the photographs, and then the images dissolve one into the other. So we have this sensation when we're watching it in the gallery space of falling into the screen in this kind of continuous long drop, and we never actually hit the ground, but we move through these different times and places. One of the reasons why I made these two films with these two very different ways of moving the camera, or moving through the cinematic space of the film, was to try and reflect on and replicate something of the view that we have of modern contemporary landscapes through the eye of the drone, which is the view from the drone has come to kind of dominate our understanding of landscapes where conflict is present. So this has become the new battlefield in terms of representation. So the reason I became fascinated with working from the air was really to do with the way in which contemporary warfare is represented now in the media. So this image of the drone's eye view, which is so common now, it's a kind of common shorthand for looking at the battlefield. The history, I wanted to really investigate the history of that perspective, and having witnessed the 2003 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which came in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. It took me back to the 91 Gulf War, which was really the first time that we saw this aerial perspective very commonly circulating in the media. And this was one of the, this was a really radical departure for the way in which warfare was depicted in the media. It was the first time we saw the battlefield from the view of the attacking Air Force. It was the first time we were told that aerial warfare was clean and clinical and precise, that it would get the job done quickly, that the casualties would be minimal, that the disruption would be minimal. So this idea of this kind of surgical strike really comes out of that 91 Gulf War. And it was the first time we saw live feed footage from a camera that was mounted on a cruise missile, for example. So you would be watching a live feed of a weapon that was being delivered. It was recording its own journey to the target and then its own destruction and the destruction of the site. So this was a really radical shift from the kind of images that came out of the First and the Second World War. One of the things that was very striking for me witnessing the 91 Gulf War as somebody who had grown up in Iraq as a child and had been living in that country and knowing that landscape was just how much of a misrepresentation those images were of that landscape. So in the case of Iraq, it's a very rich and varied landscape. There are large areas of desert, but there's also these two great rivers between which there's some of the most fertile land, on the planet. There are also mountains in the north, beautiful mountains in the north and along the east border with Iran. And then in the south, very famously, the marshes, which is a very particular kind of ecosystem and environment. So the fact that we were seeing the Iraqi landscape in the 91 Gulf War as just being a desert landscape with nothing and emptied out really of people, of structures, of towns, of cities, of culture, was something that was very shocking to see, and very much a reflection and a kind of confirmation of the European Orientalist idea, the 19th century Orientalist idea of the Middle Eastern landscape as being this kind of empty desert. And that also feeds very strongly into European imperialist ideas in any case of landscape elsewhere. You know, the idea that the American West was an empty space, the idea that Australia was an empty space. These spaces were kind of available, these landscapes were available for occupation because the populations that did live there were somehow invisible to Europeans. The term shadow sites is a term that's borrowed from aerial archaeology, which is a discipline that Crawford, amongst many others, developed in the space between the First and the Second World War, where they were using this aerial perspective. They were working from the air, and when the sun was very low in the sky in the early morning or the late evening, what would happen is that structures on the ground, which were very, very slight, very tiny little differences in height of maybe the foundations of a building, would suddenly be revealed from the air if you were above them as almost like a latent drawing or a latent imprint in the landscape. And that's what a shadow site is. It's the footprint of a structure that you can only see when you're above it in the air, when the sun is very low in the sky and shadows are very long.